everyone. Thank you for joining us for another LinkedIn Live. My name is Jared Heckler. I'm the Director of Sales Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been with Brilliance for a little over 5 years, and I've really enjoyed the content that we've been creating, especially the last year. We really embraced the video side, which for a while we were hesitant to doing because we're not your traditional agency and we're unsure of how it would be received, but we appreciate the positive feedback and we're excited about today's conversation. I'm excited about today's conversation. This is something that is very interesting to me. I feel like I was about to say there's no right answer, but that's probably not true. There's probably a variety of ways you can approach this, but it's a fun topic to discuss regardless. I'm going to pass it to Lori and let her introduce herself.
Yes. Hello. A little bit of background on me. I started Brilliance in 1998. My background's in computer electrical engineering. I went to school at Purdue and ended up through an internship at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I eventually worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program, which was an amazing opportunity. I ended up meeting my husband there. He also was a flight controller at NASA. He eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation. And he had a job promotion that brought us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Rockwell's headquarters are, where he managed their largest data warehouse. And when we relocated to Milwaukee, I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space. And the web was kind of in its infancy in 1998, and I decided to start a web development company. And it's been a ton of fun. We developed a niche in working with manufacturers and distributors in helping them to implement digital commerce solutions. And the business has grown. My husband, Dave, left Rockwell 10 years ago, and now he leads our development team. We made the Inc. 5000 list last year. And I'm really excited about the conversation we're having today. As we talk, so we work a lot in the B2B e-commerce space. And this is a topic that just frequently comes up. Like, if I'm selling products online, how does that change how we approach sales compensation? So really excited about the conversation, but I probably shouldn't get ahead of myself, Jared. I know we've got some other intro activities to do here.
Yeah, well, we'll make it quick here because we want to get into the topic. So if you are comfortable sharing with where you're from, we'd love to hear from you. And please, throughout the conversation, if you have thoughts on how your organization is approaching this or ideas and that you'd like to share or feedback, please feel free to chime in. And then if you do get a minute, we'd ask that you give us a follow on LinkedIn. We're constantly working at continuing to provide as much content as we can that we believe is relative to the digital space. And we think you'd find some value in it. All right. So, Lori, providing commissions for e-commerce sales. I'll start with, we do have a resource. I just put it in the chat. We went public last week with this. And it's available to anyone out there. If you're interested in grabbing that and leveraging it for yourself, it's available to you. So do what you please with it. But before we dive into that, the reason why we created that resource and the reason why we're having this conversation today is because we have a variety of organizations approaching us, prospects and customers, talking about, we believe in the vision of e-commerce. We know there's a revenue stream there that we can take advantage of and leverage within our business. But how do we support our sales team? How do we make the e-commerce channel successful? But also, how do we support the sales team? And for a while there, Lori, our go-to response was always just compensate them for everything. Compensate the sales team the same way, through the e-commerce channel that you would if they're making a sale directly to someone else.
Yeah.
And that's good feedback. And that's actually one of the strategies that you'll see, and we'll talk about a little bit further here. But after doing some further reflection and diving into this and having some additional conversation we are a Gartner client with Gartner analysts and with prospects and customers, we uncovered some other ideas of how organizations can be setting up their sales structure. But most importantly, what I really want to revisit is the power of adoption through your sales team. Lori, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, sure. And before I do, I just want to say thanks for those who have shared where they're connecting from. It's to Terrence from Milwaukee. Glad that you're here with us. I know we've got some others in the chat too. Adoption. is so important. And what's really interesting to me is when we talk to our customers, we have a customer advisory board. And when we talk to those that are really successful with their digital commerce strategy, what we hear over and over again is that the success is really a key part of that success is the buy-in that they have from their sales team as a part of their digital commerce strategy. And and I've heard that from my customers. I've also heard that when I've been at B2B Next or B2B Online and other conferences where you hear other speakers talking on their experiences in B2B e-commerce. But I think it's really important that we not minimize the role that sales teams have in the success of a B2B commerce strategy. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about, sometimes people think about digital commerce as reaching new customers to help new customers buy products, which is true, but also digital commerce really is more holistic than that. And in a B2B setting, a lot of it is about reaching your existing customer base and enabling them to place orders with you online. And the people that own those relationships already are your existing sales team. And there's more reasons than that in terms of why adoption and buy-in is important from your sales team. At the end of the day, I think it kind of just goes to generally, like when you think about business leadership, you want buy-in from your entire team. Like in some ways, creating happy customers is really about creating an engaged team. And so thinking about what does it look like to ensure sales teams feel like digital commerce is a win-win opportunity for them too, that it isn't something that they're competing with, but something that's supporting them.
Absolutely. So we have embraced this idea. We're going to sell we're going to sell through, digital. We're going to embrace e-commerce, and we're going to get our sales team on board. And so now we need to figure out, how do we compensate the sales team? How do we get them excited about going to their customers and saying, hey, Mr. Customer, you can place your orders through our customer portal here. We referenced one in the early part of the conversation here, which was our kind of our go-to piece of feedback ultimately was to make things easier for the business, to make things, make your sales team happy, and to really drive the adoption of your e-commerce site. It was compensate your sales team the same way you would if they were selling directly to another customer. While that can be a great strategy, there's definitely some cons to it from a business perspective. When you look at the business side, the sales team is ultimately doing a little bit less work. They are, right? We're doing less work when we're having a customer place an order online. And therefore, you would think that the business should be able to capture a little bit more margin in that, in an approach through e-commerce. Can you think of any other cons, Lori, or ideas around why that might not be the best path for somebody?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, the con mainly is tied to margin for most businesses in terms of why they think that's not a good plan. I think, I know you hit on it, like one of the advantages of doing it that way is really around simplicity. And I know and I think it's certainly better from my perspective, it's definitely a better route to go than not providing compensation to your sales team at all. Like, I think that creates issues. Yesterday I had shared the article that you wrote, Jared, on LinkedIn, and I know that was one of the points of feedback that we heard from Sarah. Had commented that she thought simplicity was really important from the perspective, like as a pro for this plan, it makes it easier for your sales team to like understand and to figure out what they're going to get compensated on. So yeah.
All right, so let's talk about another approach. So how about the idea of weighting e-commerce sales differently than direct sales? So this is, I guess, speaking towards simplicity, this is where things can start to get a little bit more complicated, because now you're going to start providing commissions differently for what comes through e-commerce versus what comes through direct sales efforts. But it does feel a little bit more win-win in a sense. You have a sales team who is still going to get some level of credit for sales that are coming through the e-commerce channel based on the customer that they've set up. And they can also then direct their efforts to focus in on bigger items while customer leverages the e-commerce channel for some of the more simplistic simple products that they like to place orders on.
Yeah.
Anything else you can think of about pros or con for an approach like that?
Yeah, and I think I think that to you, I think what you said is great in the sense that this creates more of a win-win scenario. And I think even when things can get more complicated in terms of sales compensation, the key from my perspective is thinking through like how do you make it understandable? So even in some situations that might be a little bit more complex, like how do you make it make sense in a way that might be understood relatively easily? So it doesn't mean that you couldn't have a more complex scenario. I just think it's thinking through how you're going to make sure that people understand how they make more money and can see the direct relationship between their activity and the money that they're making.
Agreed. So what I will throw in here is you can come up with a variety of ideas, and not all of these are mutually exclusive to each other. Specifically, the next topic that we wanted to hit was if you were supporting the idea of adoption on your e-commerce platform and your sales team is out there, you can incentivize your sales team to say, we're going to give you X amount of dollars per account that you get to sign up online. Plus, after that first order, we'll give you something as well. And then from there, perhaps you restructure it to make it a little bit more beneficial for the organization at that point. But you're also still compensating the sales team. You could take that approach and tie it to another approach as well, because it's definitely not mutually exclusive. But I found that idea to be interesting because you get the effort, you get the the people power behind your organization to be out driving that adoption to your website, and you can still keep the sales team happy. So it does feel win-win, which I know is something that we always look for.
Yeah.
Anything else you would add to that one?
Yeah, I think I've heard a variation on this one that's somewhat related, where I know of a company who, when an order comes in off of digital commerce, they're in B2B sales, and the order comes in, but it's not a customer that is an existing customer of theirs. Initially, there is not commission paid to a rep on it, but they give a list of those customers. They divide up those new accounts and they send them out to different people on their sales team then to follow up with. And so if your sales team then gets on a call, there's a certain list of things that need to happen. But if they can get on a call and have a conversation with that customer, then that salesperson is tied to that account and gets credit for that. So I think that's often a related question of this that comes up in terms of how to divide up new sales that come in that may not be tied to someone, and is also tied to this idea that you have here, Jared, around potentially there might be a greater incentive around that initial relationship building, and potentially you could have commission related to business that's happening digitally decrease over time, if that makes sense. You have to always think, if that's going to be the case, you want to think through what are the negative, what are you reinforcing potentially, unintentionally, what are you directing your team to spend time on based on the ways that you're compensating them.
Right. So there is a fourth idea in the article, but I'm going to say, go check out the article. It's one of my favorites through our research, and I thought it was a really fascinating idea to be supporting various aspects of the business. But yeah, go check that one out. What I want to dive into now, Lori, is outside of the first one that we mentioned, we've talked about complexity. It really, outside of the first one of everything can be compensated the same way, tracking is difficult. This becomes complex in some sense. Yeah. And we started talking about, while you figure out the way to set this up, and there's probably some complexity in that, but there's more complexity in terms of making sure you have the right technology in place. Can you speak to, when we were talking about that, you had reference that idea of ensuring you have the right technology in place to support these strategies?
Yeah, so you want to think about how, and in some sense, it goes back to that idea of ensuring your sales team has clarity on how what their activity ties to what they're making. And that means that you want there to be some form of somewhat timely reporting that can be generated around sales that are attributed to a salesperson and calculating their commission. And you want to ensure that that reporting is accurate, and that doesn't create a lot of manual work for your team to come up with those reports. And so in order to do that, that really comes back to technology and systems. You're going to want to ensure that you have a path for in whatever format you decide to calculate those commissions, that your digital commerce is tracking appropriately. Like if there is a process for some of our customers, when a customer signs up, they're asked if they're already working with the salesperson, and it's getting that information there. In some instances, in many cases, a company will have that stored in their back office system in an ERP system. And when a customer signs up online, they may be asked if they have an account number, and that'll tie to the back office system, which would indicate what salesperson they're working with. But just thinking about like, how is that data going to be captured, and what tools are you going to use to generate the reports that are going to provide, your finance team what they need, and your salespeople the reports that they need to ensure everybody is clear on what's happening and why.
Yeah, I mean, having the right people in the room, we can come up with a bunch of ideas of how to make this work that's going to support the organization's growth, the e-commerce strategy, the sales team. But ultimately, you need to make sure you have the right people in the room to validate. You had shared a story with me about a connection of yours who had shared with you. I don't know if you want to share it or not. Maybe
Sure. I mean, I can talk a little bit about it. Yeah, I was talking to another business owner who created a sales incentive, some goals and related compensation around those goals. That worked in one sense really well. Their sales team knocked it out of the park, hit the goals exactly as they kind of had outlined. But in the end, the payout on the work that they did was so high that the business was losing money on it. And I think that's always at least, I don't know, as a business owner myself, like that's the concern. That's what causes people to be like, get nervous about how we might structure commissions and sales compensations, which to your point, Jared, is why it's really key to ensure you've got, your finance team helping you in terms of building out projections, but what's a best case and a worst case. If people hit the goal, if people way exceed the goal, like what does this still look like for us? And are we sure that this looks good for everyone involved? And also, to your point, like having everyone in the room around, both in terms of like thinking through how to design the compensation, but also thinking through how do you design your business systems to ensure that's going to work well in terms of, in terms of the reporting, in terms of, the calculations, in terms of like how quickly, another thing that's related to systems is depending on your reporting, how soon will your sales team see that translate into their paycheck? So all of those things are good to think through with multiple people in the room.
Yeah, ensuring your process, right? And making sure that you feel good about every step of the way. As I reflected on that conversation we were having about that story, about the organization who was all excited to see this success come from this sales plan and then ultimately not be profitable. It does make you think, like, could you have tested out a division? Could you have tested out a product line? Could you have, maybe taken a small piece of your sales team and tested this out versus making it and I'm making an assumption that it's company-wide, but making this company-wide initiative. So I think
that's a great point. Like thinking about how to experiment with it, right?
And make sure you have the right process in place.
Yeah.
Which is funny to hear that coming from a salesperson. I think the engineering roots have really rubbed off on me here at Brilliance. So, most importantly, when it comes to process, at the end of the day, you need to make sure what you're doing is working. And, it ultimately comes back to, ROI. Are you seeing profit in the business? Are you growing your sales? Is e-commerce a valuable strategy for you? Is your sales team seeing, the opportunity for more efficiency on their front? taking a step back and reviewing your KPIs and reviewing everything to ensure that you have made the right steps with this initiative is a key piece in anyone's process, but specific in the process that we're referencing right now. Do you have an opinion on how often or when someone should be taking this step? Because to your point in the earlier story, if you think about, again, these are just assumptions based on what you've shared, but if you would have added a piece of the process of you were going to be reviewing this after the first quarter or couple weeks in, halfway through the first quarter, I don't know, you may have caught that this is heading in a direction that's going to create a problem for you at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think for many, I think it'll really depend on the company and where they're already at. So if it's a company that hasn't implemented digital commerce yet, like certainly, like this is something to come up with a game plan around before you implement your digital commerce strategy. And I think really ensure, back to that idea of having multiple people in the room, ensure you're talking to your sales managers and like collaborating on how to make this win-win from a company perspective, and also setting some expectations around like when does it make sense to come back and revisit that? Like when do we want to make sure we're reviewing if the things that we had assumed are playing out to be true? And also, are there unintended consequences cropping up that we didn't anticipate? Are there ways? I know, Jared, in your article, you share a story about, about how you experienced sales compensation in another role that you were in, and how that played out for you. Like, are there ways that the structure that we've set up is playing out in creating behaviors that we didn't expect, and using that to learn? I think the challenge that exists from my perspective is that ideally, you don't want to create a situation where you're you're making people like make less money, like just thinking about, I mean, to your earlier point of how is there a way to kind of experiment or try some things on a limited basis that you can roll out more broadly, so that you don't get yourself in a situation where the compensation you are providing is too much and you have to pull it back. Or at least if you're going to be in a place where you need to pull it back, then you're going to think about how else are you going to make this role worthwhile to your team. Yeah.
I think that's well said. Absolutely. Really, going back to having the right people in the room, speaking to like a sales leader, really understanding his sales team and knowing how, when you approach them with an opportunity for commission, a new opportunity or spiff or whatever it may be, having their feedback, knowing how their team might approach this differently, because that was me. As this early in my sales career, when I looked at that price book and the commission programs came through, I was figuring out how am I going to make the most money for myself as quickly as possible. And I think that's just goes back again to speaking to the idea of having the right people in the room and having all the people in the room, not just sales, but the same could be said for the finance and the marketing teams, leadership on down.
Yeah.
So Lori, I have a question for you. I feel like one of the most common concerns we get when having these conversations is that this is just overly complicated, and that's why we ultimately used that first piece of feedback we talked about is just make it the same across the board, because it simplifies everything. How does one make it less complicated, or how should you, as you think about that question, what would you say to someone who's thinking about this?
Yeah. Well, I would say don't let the fact, I mean, there are a lot of things to think through. And I think there can be sometimes a desire to, like, if something seems hard, like it's just easier to not engage with it. But from my perspective, like that's not really an option. The world is going digital. Like if you're not selling products online, or at least enabling digital to you're creating a path where customers can engage with your company digitally, where they can be able to initiate and do portions of your sales process without having to talk to someone by leveraging digital. That's just the reality of where our world is right now. So you can't ignore that. And with that in place, you also can't ignore your sales team. I mean, I know, so I know for many companies, one of the reasons they hold off on digital is because they're fearful of like, what will that, our sales team may feel this is a threat. And so I think even though there are moments when I've experienced this too, where there are moments where it's like, this seems really hard. I'm not even certain I want to go there. I just don't think that's an option for us as business leaders. And so I think the challenge is to think through, how do we step into this in a smart way, and recognize that we may try some things that don't work, and yet we're gonna learn from. We're gonna do our best to make the most educated decisions we can. We're gonna create trust with our team so they understand we're trying to do this in a way that's win-win for all of us. And we're going to think through, how do we do this in a way that enables us to all be successful. And I just think back to the feedback that we hear from our customers about, where they're seeing success, and really recognizing that they've put in the work to figure out how to design programs that are truly win-win. Yeah, I'm curious too. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jared.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I just don't know if we've got anybody on with us still that has any other thoughts or questions on this. But yeah, certainly, like I think, Jared, what I heard from you too is like, I don't know that what we're sharing is like the complete picture of all the things that you could do with respect to sales compensation. There's so much. Oh, I may have lost Jared. Hopefully I'm still on. But yeah, so would just love to continue to hear from others in terms of what they see as the best path. I am not certain if I'm still hoping I'm still live, and maybe I just lost Jared in the process. So I will just say that, I think there's a lot of, for me, sales compensation. And so you're back. That's good. I was getting nervous, Jared. You left me. But no, I was going to say that to me, this is just another example of how, like, as organizations, we're constantly needing to adapt to the world around us and think through how, thanks, Terrence, you let me know I was still there. I appreciate that. We're constantly having to adapt and recognize, the world's changing around us. How do we change and adapt to grow with it too?
Yeah, I completely agree. If you are interested in having a further conversation, obviously we are not the experts, end all be all when it comes to this type of strategy, but we do have frequent conversations with other organizations, and we'd be happy to give you our share experience, talk through anything that might be of use to you. But thank you everyone for joining us today. And yeah, as I mentioned, feel free to connect with Lori and myself, and we'd be happy to discuss further. Lori, anything you'd like to add?
No, it's been fun. Look forward to connecting with others who are passionate about this topic too. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.